All right, good morning. How's everybody this morning? Good, yes. It's good to see you. It's always good to see you and be able to come together and worship in God's house. And so it's always a wonderful time. Fair warning, this is going to be a little different than the type of talk that I would usually give. So prepare for something a little different. Before we start, I want to give you a quick opportunity here. So there's a QR code. We're going to be looking at a lot of text, and it may be difficult for you to see on the screen. So if you'd like, you can scan that QR code with your phone, and it'll open up in my Dropbox. It's a PDF, and you'll see some of the text that we're going to look at. So you'll give you a moment to look at that. I don't know, Eric, if we can put that link in the chat as well. If not, that's fine. You'll probably be able to see it pretty well at home on your own screen, but here it might be a little more difficult. Also, if you like, you can actually download this PDF. I opened it up for download as well, so it'll be a nice resource for you as you look at some questions that people may have around the particular topic is the Sabbath and its relative importance in our life, and how there's a big misconception about the Sabbath. So, all right, everybody good? Moving forward? All right, excellent. Holidays. Do you like holidays? Yeah? What do you like about holidays? You rest, right? You get a day off work. Everybody likes a holiday, right? Except for maybe business owners. Sometimes business owners don't like holidays because they lose some of their business because they close for holidays and things like that, right? And I've had some bosses in my life that have maybe held a little bit of a grudge that they had to give me a day off because it was a holiday. But generally speaking, we all like holidays, right? And you know, there's something interesting about the word holiday that I'm ashamed to say it took me way too long to actually understand what it was actually saying. I was in my 30s by the time I figured this out, so not all that long ago. But to be fair, the way we spell it here in America is also kind of misleading, right? Because we spell it with an I. In the UK, we actually spell it differently. It's spelled with a Y. Holiday. And you maybe still miss it, so I'll make it super clear. It is the smashing together of two words, holy day. Holiday is a holy day. The reason I figured this out is I was working with someone that is from Russia, and they were working on scheduling at work, and so they said, we have to make adjustments because this week we have and she said, holy day. And I said, oh, why did it take me to my 30s and somebody speaking in Russian for me to understand that holiday is holy day put together, right? So a holiday is a holy day in some regard. Now, of course, in our secular world, we don't really commemorate things that are necessarily holy, but that's where the root of that word comes from, right? Holiday is a holy day. Now, of course, in the Old Testament times, they had several holy days, right? So they had things like Purim, they had things like Pentecost, they had things like Yom Kippur, right? They had holy days. Those were truly holy days. And so we've taken that concept and applied them to things that are very secular. I'll give you a few examples of how some of these work. So does anybody know what we celebrate on the third Monday in February? If you're interested, this year it was February 22nd. What do we celebrate on the third Monday in February? President's Day. Officially, actually, it's George Washington's birthday. George Washington was actually born on February 22nd of 1732, so it's technically Washington's birthday. What we like to do today is be a little bit more inclusive, so we just kind of lump all the presidents all together and we say, it's just a general President's Day. Actually, it's celebrating Washington's birthday. Okay, let's take a look at another one. You probably know this one, July 4th. What are we celebrating July 4th? Independence Day, that's right. Specifically, it is the signing of the Declaration of Independence happened on July 4th. If you don't know, I'm sorry, but you should. It was 1776 that was signed, right? So we call that a holiday here in North America and the United States, right? Because it's commemorating an important event that took place. What about the second Monday in October? Does anybody know what we celebrate the second Monday in October? If you're interested, that's October 12th this year. Columbus Day, that's right. And the specific day that we actually look at for Columbus Day is October 12th, 1492. Everybody knows what happened then, right? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Yes, we have to have a mnemonic device to remember things in our life as well. So that is actually not Columbus's birthday or anything like that. It is actually the day that Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492. So we celebrate that. Not getting into the political realms of whether that's a good thing to celebrate or not. It's a federal holiday, so just to be aware. How about November 11th? What do we celebrate on November 11th? Veterans Day, that's right. Now, for those that are not in the United States, this is also known as Armistice Day. What does that actually commemorate? Does anybody know? The end of World War I. It happened at 11 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on the 11th day of the 11th month. We celebrate the end of World War I, Armistice Day. That's right. The 10th is the birthday of the Marine Corps. Bruce always likes to remind me of that every year because it's very important. Absolutely true. And it's nice because now you get kind of a two-day veteran celebration in there as well. Okay, so we know when World War I ended, right? November 11th. What day did World War II end? Isn't that interesting? We know when World War I ended, but we don't seem to know when World War II ended. All right, let me see if I can help you. How many of you here are currently living or have previously lived in the massive state of Rhode Island? Anybody? A couple of you have? Okay. What are we celebrating Monday? VJ Day. Victory Day, we call it here in Rhode Island. Did you know that there is actually only one state that celebrates Victory Day? Rhode Island. Why do we have holidays? Help to remember things that happen that are important, correct? And you notice that we don't have a national holiday for the end of World War II like we do for the end of World War I, correct? And you notice how few of us really knew when World War II ended. Now, as it happens, World War II actually did not end on August 14th, 1945. That is when Japan made their declaration that they were ending the war. So in case you don't know, several months earlier, the European front of the war had officially come to an end, but the Pacific front had not, and so we were still fighting with the nation of Japan. And after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a couple weeks after that, they said, probably not a good idea that we continue fighting in this manner. And so they announced that they were surrendering unconditionally. Here you see some photos. These are all from August 14th, 1945. So this is when Japan said, we are surrendering. So this first photograph you see here on the left, that is Times Square, New York. People there, right? Look like they're pretty happy. Second picture you see there, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. People across the country were gathering together to celebrate the end of this horrible, horrible war. You can see another one here on the left. This is Paris, France on August 14th of 1945. You can see they're holding up newspapers saying peace. If only they knew what was coming. Anyway, not today's topic, but very, very happy. Here you see Shanghai, China, a very poor resolution picture. They apparently didn't have great resolution cameras in 1945 in Shanghai, but you can see thousands of people gathered in Shanghai to celebrate the end of World War II. Here on the left now, you see Sydney, Australia, people dancing in the streets celebrating the end of World War II. Then here on the right, you've got London, people once again celebrating in the streets, jubilant at the end of World War II. Pretty exciting. If you put yourself in the mind frame of these people, it's pretty easy to understand why they are so excited, right? I think it's fair to say that in terms of global warfare, World War II is probably about the worst we have ever seen, which makes it all the more interesting that we don't remember when it ended today. And then there's also probably what is the most famous image you've ever seen of the end of World War II. This one is actually from August 14th, 1945. In fact, it is so famous that there are two different photographs of the exact same thing happening. People noticed it and said, wow, two separate people noticed it, and they both took pictures of it, and both of them became pretty famous. So the one on the left is a photograph by Victor Jorgensen, who was a Navy photojournalist at the time. And the one on the right, I always get his name wrong because it's something I don't pronounce very often, Alfred Instandet, who was a Time magazine photographer at the time. So such a famous event that there are actually two people that saw it happening at the same time and took slightly different angles of the same picture. And both of them became famous. So it's really interesting how big a deal this was across the entire world. But it's also really interesting how easily we have forgotten when that happened. It's almost like we have this air of selective amnesia. Do you know what selective amnesia is? Incidentally, that's not when I tell my wife, yeah, I'll do it in a minute, and I haven't done it 2 hours later. That's not selective amnesia. Selective amnesia is when you forget certain elements, legitimately forget certain elements, and you can't remember them. It's almost like we have that in our mind. You maybe have heard it as the phrase of, what have you done for me lately? Maybe you've heard that one before. You can see this is a super contemporary article from 2013. Had to dig in the archives to find this one. But the politics of 2013, people were talking of politicians. What have you done for me lately? But surely God's people don't have a problem with understanding what God has done for them and remembering, right? Is that ever a problem for God's people? In Sabbath school, we've been studying the Exodus, right? It's very interesting. Let's take a look at some of the story of the Exodus. Exodus 7. Moses comes and tells Pharaoh, let my people go, right? And Pharaoh says, you know what? Instead of letting you go, I'm going to make your work harder. I've given you a very abridged version here, right? But Pharaoh says, I'm going to make your work harder. What do the Israelite people do? Do they say, well, praise the Lord? No. They grumble and complain that the work is harder. So what does God do? He sends plagues to the land of Egypt. How many of them? 10. Each one kind of increasing in intensity, right? And you'd think, Israelites living through 10 plagues, surely they would be true to God after that, right? You'd think so. Fast forward, Exodus 14. Israelites have now left Egypt and they're heading towards Sinai. They're taking a roundabout route. Don't misunderstand that. But they're heading towards Sinai, and they come to a great body of water known as the Red Sea, right? And they look behind them, and who's coming after them? The Egyptian soldiers. And do you think the Israelites look at this and say, well, you know what? I understand, but God took care of us in Egypt, so God's going to take care of us now. Is that what the Israelites said? No. Why did you bring us to the desert to kill us, Moses? We might as well have just stayed in Egypt, right? They already forgot. Well, what did God do? Parted the water, let them walk through on dry land. Egyptians thought they were going to chase after them. The water's closed. They were saved. Okay. Surely after that, Israel is going to be entirely for God, right? Well, let's take a look. Exodus 16. People say, well, sure, there was the plagues and you got us out of Egypt, and sure, you got us through the water, but now I'm hungry, Moses. Where's the food? So what does God do? He sends the manna. They're fed every day. Surely now the Israelites are going to say, all right, God's for us. We got it covered, right? Well, later in Exodus 16, they say, yeah, this manna thing is great, but we want some meat, God. Where's the meat? God says, you want meat? I'm going to give you meat coming out of your ears, guys. They get the quail, right? God sends the quail. They beat the quail down. They've got meat. All right, this time it's got to be good, right? Well, one chapter later, Exodus 17, the Israelites say, hey, you know, this manna's fine. We got some quail, but Where's all the water? I'm thirsty now. So what does God do? God instructs Moses to strike the rock. They get water out of a rock. Big miracle again, right? Surely now they can see God is really going to take care of them, right? No more problems. Exodus 32. Moses has taken a long time coming back down from Mount Sinai. So what do? Start to complain, and they build a golden calf. This is the God, right? They start dancing and celebrating this golden calf. Man, incidentally, do you know how long it was from the plagues till they got to Mount Sinai? Do you know how long a period of time that was? 45 days. 45 days. A month and a half. In a month and a half, they managed to complain about having too much work. They managed to complain about the Egyptians coming to get them. They managed to complain about not having enough food. They managed to complain about not having enough meat. They managed to complain about not having enough water. They managed to complain about Moses taking too long to come back. 6 times. You realize that's like every other week that they're complaining? Like once a week, they're complaining about something, not realizing what God has done. Do God's people forget the things that God has done for them? Sadly, yes. You can take a look at what the psalmist wrote about the people of Israel. There's 4 different verses here. It says, they forgot what he had done and the miracles that he had shown them. They forgot the signs he did in Egypt and his wonders in the fields of Zoan. But they quickly forgot what he had done. They did not wait for his advice. They forgot the God who saved them, who had done great things in Egypt. They were really forgetful. And perhaps you're tempted to think, well, you know what? If I were there, I would be faithful. Wouldn't happen to me. Be careful. Because all of us can easily forget the things that God has done for us. So, going back to where we started, holidays. Why do we have holidays? Remember important things that have happened, right? Did you know that God has a holiday that he is still telling Christians we need to observe so we remember something important? That's right. 7th day of every week, God has declared a holy day. Something for us to remember what he has done. Let's take a look. Exodus chapter 20, we're actually going to read verses 8 through 11, which is the Sabbath commandment. It says, remember, how does it start? Remember the Sabbath day, to keep the Sabbath day holy. Work and get everything done during 6 days each week, but the 7th day is a day of rest to honor the Lord your God. On that day, no one may do any work, not you, your son, or your daughter, or your male or female slaves, or your animals, or the foreigners living in your cities. Pretty clear, right? And then in verse 11, it actually gives us something very fascinating. It says, the reason, see, it's providing a rationale here. The reason is that in 6 days, the Lord made everything, the sky, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. On the 7th day, he rested, so the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. There is a holy day that happens every week, something to help you remember. What is it helping you remember? The creation of the world. It's helping you remember something important that God has done in our past. Couple things to keep in mind. The 4th commandment about the Sabbath is the only commandment that specifically instructs you to remember something. Did you notice that? No other commandment uses the word remember. Secondly, it is one of 2 commandments that lists a rationale or a reason for keeping it. The second one is honor your father and your mother so that your days will be long in the land the Lord your God is going to give you, correct? That one is actually more of a promise, but it is a reason to keep it. This is the only one that explicitly states a specific reason for you to remember something. It is the creation. And when you think about our world today, have people forgotten about the things that God has done? Have even some Christians forgotten about some of the things that God has done? There are great movements within Christianity that say the Bible is all allegorical, it's not really a true story, Genesis didn't happen. There are great swaths of people that forget what God has done. And could it be because they have also forgotten the holy day that God has declared to help them remember those things? Now, some of you probably know, I work a lot in artificial intelligence these days. Artificial intelligence, I don't feel is particularly either good or bad. It's like any tool. It can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It just depends on what you do with it. I work in artificial intelligence at work quite a bit. And one of the more popular AI platforms today is Google Gemini. Here's an interesting thought for you. Have you ever thought of artificial intelligence being religious? No. Would it shock you if I said that if Google Gemini was a person, Google Gemini would probably be a Sabbath keeper? Don't believe me? Let's find out. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, I engage with a lot of people around conversations around the Sabbath. I'm in a lot of different religious groups. I like to interact with people and talk with people, and sometimes I'll see some things that I don't fully agree with, and I'll just kind of let it go because some things I don't think are the right time or it's the right topic to go over. One that I can usually not help myself talking about is the Sabbath, because I feel it is one of the most misunderstood elements of Christianity today. Whenever I see somebody saying that the Sabbath is no more or we don't need to follow the Sabbath, I can't help but engage in a conversation about it. And as I mentioned, I get about 20 different answers of why Sabbath is no more. That is totally incompatible with the other 19 answers that I get, right? So it's all just confusion. I've gotten to the point where I've now trimmed this down to a specific process, and all I do is I just provide artificial intelligence answers from Google Gemini for people as to why the Sabbath is still relevant. And that's what I'm going to show you. So if you looked at the PDF that I sent you, we're going to go through some of those different points that people make, and I'm going to show you how Google Gemini actually understands the Sabbath better than most Christians do today. First argument that I often hear: Sabbath was only for the Jews, right? Or only given to the Jews. Have you heard this one before? Mm-hmm. So, easy enough to do. I'll plug that question directly into Google Gemini. Was the Sabbath only for Jews? No, the Sabbath was not exclusively for Jewish people. First answer it gives me. So it gives you several different things, but it says, some argue the Sabbath was created for all humanity, not just the Jewish people. Some interpretations of the Bible suggest the Sabbath is a universal command applicable to all people, not limited to any specific religion or ethnicity. In other words, it was created at creation, right? Yes. Google Gemini understands that the Sabbath isn't specifically for Jews. Isn't that weird? AI understands it, but some Christians don't? Interesting. So then you can ask another question. Because you'll hear, well, the Sabbath was given on Sinai to the Jews, and so it's just a Jewish festival, and it's a Jewish thing, and we're not Jews anymore, so we don't have to follow this. So you can ask the question: did the Sabbath predate the Ten Commandments? Yes. There is evidence in the Bible suggesting the concept of the Sabbath day, a day of rest, was observed before the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. You'll find a couple examples of these. We just read one, we referenced one in Exodus 16, right, when they were collecting the manna before the Ten Commandments were given, and God said, collect a double portion on the sixth day, right, because the next day is the Sabbath. They were already observing it before the Ten Commandments were given. That's right. That's why it's using the word remember, so therefore it's calling back to something that they already knew about, right? You can also see here the AI gave me in the answer, referring back to Genesis chapter 2, where God blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy, right? So clearly there was something there. So then you could maybe even get a little more honed in on this question. You could say, did the Sabbath exist before Moses? Yes, the Bible says the Sabbath was instituted at creation. Google AI, pretty smart here, right? One thing to note, sometimes it will try to give you a balanced answer, so it will give you some answers from or some talking points from the other side of an argument, but generally speaking, what I'm seeing here is Google believes that the Sabbath is very much instituted at creation, and you can see it's also referencing Exodus 16. So, given that the Bible indicates that the Sabbath started at creation, we might ask the question, were there any Jews on the seventh day of creation? What do you think? According to Genesis' account of creation, there were no Jews on the seventh day. Makes sense, right? In fact, it even tells me that Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day. The Sabbath was established on the seventh day, and Judaism's origins start with Abraham quite a bit of time later. How can something only be for the Jews when it was around centuries before there were Jews? Bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Okay. You could even ask this next question. Was Pharaoh unhappy about the Sabbath in Exodus 6? Or Exodus 5, sorry. Yes, it's likely that Pharaoh was displeased about the concept of a Sabbath or any form of rest for Israelite slaves in Exodus 5. Another piece of evidence that the Sabbath likely existed before the giving of the Ten Commandments. That's right. Is there any evidence that the Sabbath was observed before the Ten Commandments? Yes, Exodus 16, as we just said, right? Doesn't really seem to stand the test, right, to say the Sabbath was only given to the Jews or the Sabbath was only part of the Ten Commandments at Exodus 20, because you can see its origins date all the way back to the beginning of the world. Next one I hear a lot. Well, Jesus broke the Sabbath, so it's okay for us to break the Sabbath. Have you heard this one before? So you could ask the question directly, did Jesus break the Sabbath? Jesus did not violate the Sabbath as intended by God. Simple enough, right? What Jesus did, if you go through here, I won't read the whole thing to you, but if you go through, basically what it's saying what Jesus did was challenge the Pharisees in their very strict interpretation of what the Sabbath was, their traditions of how to do it, but Jesus did not break the Sabbath of the Ten Commandments. Didn't happen. Then you could ask, did Jesus keep the Sabbath? Yes, Jesus did keep the Sabbath in the New Testament. Google's pretty smart here. Bible records that Jesus observed the Sabbath as part of his regular custom. Did Jesus sin? No, according to Christian belief, Jesus did not sin, and it even gives us a few references. For example, down at the bottom there, 2 Corinthians 5:21, for our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin. Jesus was not a sinner. Okay, but what is sin? That's right. So we can, of course, we have the textbook, so we can cheat and we can just go straight to the textbook, right? 1 John 3:4, the person who sins breaks God's law. Yes, sin is living against God's law, right? But Google AI also understands this. It's an act or thought or an attitude that violates a religious law or standard, particularly those established by a deity. So you can see sin can be defined as violating religious law or command, such as those found in the Bible. So if Jesus didn't sin and the Sabbath was a command, did Jesus keep the Sabbath? Did Jesus sin? No. So he must have kept the Sabbath, right? We could ask another point that I get a lot. Jesus abolished or changed the Sabbath. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask some very specific questions here. Did Jesus abolish the Sabbath in Mark chapter 2? We can read what Mark chapter 2 says. Then Jesus said to the Pharisees, the Sabbath day was made to help people. They were not made to be ruled by the Sabbath day. So then the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. In your King James, you're probably going to recognize this as the Sabbath was made for man, correct? And Google's answer back to me is no. Jesus did not abolish Sabbath observance in Mark chapter 2. Once again, it's pointing out he was challenging the Pharisees' very strict interpretation of what the Sabbath was, but he was not abolishing the Sabbath. Since Jesus didn't repeat the fourth commandment, this is another question that I will ask, because you'll often hear, oh, well, you know, the fourth commandment never shows up in the New Testament, right? Like all the other ones are repeated, but this one. So I asked directly, since Jesus didn't repeat the fourth commandment, did he intend to end it? Answer? Jesus did not explicitly repeat the Sabbath commandment because it was already a well-established Jewish law and practice. Have you noticed when you think about the Sermon on the Mount, right? We often look at the things Jesus says, right? He says, you've heard it said, or it is written that you shall not murder or you shall not kill, right? What did Jesus say? If you get angry with your brother, you're actually guilty of the same thing. He made it more intense. He said, you see that it's written that you should not commit adultery. Did he leave it at that? No. He said, if you look at another person lustfully, you are committing adultery in your mind, so you're still guilty. Jesus made it more intense. The interesting thing about the Sabbath is he actually made it less intense. Have you noticed that? He was saying the Pharisees had very strict rules, and that's not what the Sabbath was intended for. It was meant to be a blessing for you, not something that makes your life harder. Okay. Next argument I hear. Sabbath is not part of the moral law. This is a really shaky one, but have you heard this one before? Are the Ten Commandments moral laws? The first question I ask. Yes, the Ten Commandments are widely regarded as summarizing God's moral law. Okay. Is the fourth commandment moral law? I'm going to get more specific here. What do you think Google's going to tell me? The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, is considered moral law because it reflects God's established order for creation and humanity's relationship with him. Pretty clear, right? Do Christians need to keep the Ten Commandments? Google says, yes, Christians should keep the Ten Commandments. Not really a lot of ground to stand on there, is there? Next one that I'll often hear. God changed or ended the Sabbath after Jesus ascended. Have you heard this one? The New Testament church changed the observance to Sunday. Okay, well, let's ask the very direct question. Does the Bible say God changed the Sabbath? Google says the Bible does not explicitly state that God changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. Not in there. Next question. Does 1 Corinthians 16, which we'll read here in a second, mean Christians don't need to observe the Sabbath? So 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2 says, on the first day of every week, each one of you should put aside money as you have been blessed. Save it up so you will not have to collect money after I come. And the people who want to argue against the Sabbath will say, see, they're taking up offering on the first day of the week, Sunday. So therefore, they're looking at it. What does Google say? No, 1 Corinthians 16 does not mean Christians do not observe the Sabbath. What it's saying is it's discussing a particular special offering that they're collecting for a specific purpose, not actually referencing a worship service in any particular way. Also, part of the problem is we seem to think that the way we conduct our church services today has been unchanged for 2,000 years. Well, keep in mind, back at this time, they were meeting in people's houses. They weren't meeting in a dedicated church building, right? So essentially, yes, no. 1 Corinthians 16:2 does not mean that Christians don't observe the Sabbath. Does Hebrews 4 mean the Sabbath is abolished? And I'll often see Hebrews 4:9. This shows that the rest for God's people is still coming. And Google says, no, Hebrews 4 does not abolish the Sabbath. And instead, it discusses a deeper spiritual rest that believers can enter through Christ. Not replacing the Sabbath. How about Colossians 2? Is Colossians 2 referring to the weekly Sabbath? So if you look there, Colossians 2:16 through 17 says, don't let anyone make rules for you about, there's lots of things there, I truncated it to what's relevant, a Sabbath day. These things were like shadows of what was to come, but what is true and real has come and is found in Christ. So, does that mean that the Sabbath is now irrelevant, done away with? Right, what was my question? My question was, is Colossians 2 referring to the weekly Sabbath? So Google says it's very likely Colossians 2:16 through 17 is not referring to the weekly Sabbath, but rather to the ceremonial Sabbaths and festivals of the Old Testament. Makes sense? Okay. So then I ask, did Hebrews observe other Sabbaths beyond the weekly one? Google's response, yes, Hebrews observe different types of Sabbaths. Gives you a few examples there. If you like, you can read through that in your spare time. So then the next question I ask in relation to that is the weekly Sabbath a shadow? The weekly Sabbath, specifically the seventh-day Sabbath, is not considered a shadow of things to come in the same way that the ceremonial laws and festivals are. While the Bible does refer to certain Sabbaths as shadows pointing to Christ, it gives us the reference there in Colossians, the weekly Sabbath instituted at creation is seen as a memorial of God's rest and a day for remembering God as the Creator. Interesting. Are you kind of amazed at how well Google Gemini understands the Sabbath? Another one. I will hear, well, the day of Pentecost was on a Sunday, so that means that we now observe Sunday as a holy day. Well, I asked the question, since Pentecost in Acts 2 was on a Sunday, does Sunday replace the Sabbath? Google's answer, no, Pentecost does not signify a change from the Sabbath. Pretty concise. Next question I ask, are Christians to meet each Sunday to commemorate Christ's resurrection? You probably heard this argument before. Well, Christ raised on Sunday, so we gather every Sunday to remember that. Google's answer, the Bible does not explicitly command Christians to observe Resurrection Day weekly in the sense of a distinct formalized celebration akin to annual holiday. Doesn't say that. When did Christians start to observe Sunday is my next question. The first explicit reference to Christians observing Sunday as a day of worship rather than the Sabbath came from figures like Barnabas and John Martyr. Keep in mind, this is not the Barnabas in the book of Acts. This is a different Barnabas. Also some question as to the authenticity of this book. In the mid-2nd century. Which century did Jesus die in? The first, correct. We start counting years from Jesus' birth, right? So roughly speaking, year 1 would be the year Jesus was born, right? Jesus lived to be, about 33 years old, right? So that would be roughly, I know it's not exact, but roughly around 33 AD. We're talking about the mid-2nd century now, is when we start seeing people observing Sunday worship. That's a long time after Jesus was gone. Just to be clear, this is probably about a century after Jesus' death and at least a decade after the last of the original apostles had died. First time you see it. Here's another argument. Any day can be the Sabbath. Have you heard this? Oh, I worship God every day. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right? Oh, you just pick 1 out of 7, right? He doesn't care which one. 1 out of 7. I'm going to pick Thursdays are my holy day now, right? And I'm going to go to work and say, my religion says I have to be off every Thursday. I don't know what they're going to say about that, but nonetheless, I've heard this argument a lot. What do you think Google thinks? We'll ask the question directly. Can any day be the Sabbath? No. According to the Bible, the Sabbath is the Sabbath day is specifically the 7th day of the week, which is Saturday, and is not a day that can be chosen or designated by individuals. Does Romans 14 abolish the Sabbath? We'll look at what Romans 14 says. Romans 14:5, some think that one day is more important than another, and others think that every day is the same. Let all be sure in their own minds. In a vacuum of itself, that could be kind of convincing, right? Yes. But Google says, no, Romans 14 does not abolish the Sabbath. The passage deals with differing views on food and holy days among early Christians, not the Sabbath commandment itself. Not talking about the Sabbath. Another argument I hear, we don't know what day the Sabbath really is. Maybe you've heard different variations of this, like, oh, well, the calendar's changed, so we're not sure which day it really falls on now, or there's no specific record. The Bible doesn't mention the word Saturday ever, or anything. Maybe you've heard some variation of this argument. So let's ask Google, what day is the Sabbath? The Bible specifies the 7th day of the week, Saturday, as the Sabbath. Pretty concise. I could ask it in the reverse way. Is Saturday the Sabbath? The Bible specifies the Sabbath as the 7th day of the week, which is Saturday. Okay, Couldn't trip her up. Okay. Next question I ask, can we be sure Saturday is the seventh day of the week and therefore the Sabbath? Yes, Saturday is universally recognized as the seventh day of the week. The Bible, specifically the Old Testament, establishes Saturday as the Sabbath, the seventh day, commemorating God's rest after creation. Historical and linguistic evidence, including the name of Saturday in many languages, further supports this. And you can see it actually gives us a few things. One of the most interesting one I see there is actually Jewish tradition. Are you telling me that the Jews, who Jesus had to admonish for being too strict about the Sabbath, don't know which day the Sabbath is today? Because they're still keeping the same day. Maybe you've heard this argument. Christians celebrate the Lord's Day, which they designate to be Sunday, instead of the Sabbath. Have you heard this one before? So we could ask the question, all right, fair enough. What day does the Bible say is the Lord's Day? What do you think the answer is? While Revelations 1:10 is the only instance of the phrase the Lord's Day in the Bible, it does not explicitly identify it as Sunday. It doesn't tell you what day it is. In fact, it gives you some other pieces of information there, like, for example, whenever the other books of the Bible are referring to what we know now call Sunday, it makes reference to the first day of the week. In fact, we just read one of those a few slides ago, didn't we, on the first day of the week. So seems like that's not necessarily going to be a slam dunk for Sunday. A couple of things to look at here. Early church tradition is where this is really interesting. It says, early Christian writings like the Gospel of Peter, keep some of these in mind, and the writings of Ignatius of Antioch began using the Lord's Day to refer to Sunday, the day of Jesus' resurrection. Interesting. Gospel of Peter, you say? Let's ask the question, is the Gospel of Peter authentic? No, the Gospel of Peter is not considered authentic by scholars. Now, Peter's testimony, sure, yes, but the book that was written, the Gospel of Peter, is a fake. When do you think it was written? I think it actually says on here, doesn't it? Yes, dated to the mid-2nd century. Have you heard that already this morning? Correct. Yes, right. Yes, the epistle is a legitimate book. The Gospel of Peter is a forgery for several reasons, and it was written in the mid-2nd century. Do you think Peter was alive in 150 AD? Nope. Interesting, because we also looked at the mid-2nd century as where we first see record of Christians observing Sunday. It's almost like they just wrote a book to try and support their point. Interesting. Let's go back a slide for a second, because the other one it points us to is Ignatius of Antioch. So we could say, okay, when did Ignatius of Antioch write his letters? He wrote his letters, including 7 that are considered authentic. Keep that in mind as well. 7 of his letters are considered authentic. 8 of them are considered to be forgery. So more than half of the writings of Ignatius of Antioch are considered to be fake and not actually written by him. But they were likely written in the early 2nd century. Do you notice something else here? 2nd century. We're talking a century after Jesus' death, a minimum of a decade after John, the Apostle John's death. Do you see things changing at a certain time frame here? Yeah. Here's another interesting argument I will often hear. Jesus is our Sabbath. Have you heard this one? This one's a really strange one. Well, we don't really need the Sabbath because Jesus is the Sabbath for us. Okay. Which text tells me that? Because I don't really see that. But let's ask the question, is Jesus the Sabbath? No, Jesus is not the Sabbath itself. Pretty plain. Is Jesus a replacement for the Sabbath? No, Jesus is not our substitute for the Sabbath. Okay, not much evidence for that. Do you see something here, though? You could take any one of these different arguments, and on their own, they could seem kind of convincing. Some of them are even scriptural based. Have you noticed that? And yet all of them are teaching something wrong. Keep in mind, this is not a question that, or a point that people make, but it's one that I will retort to others. Will the Sabbath be observed in heaven and the new earth? Google says, yes, according to the Bible, the Sabbath will be observed in the new heavens and new earth. Specifically, Isaiah 66:23 states that from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come and worship before me, says the Lord. Isn't it interesting how smart Google seems to understand this? And here is the verse, Isaiah 66:22 and 23. It says, I will make a new heavens and a new earth, which will last forever, says the Lord. In the same way, your names and your children will always be with me. All people will come to worship me every Sabbath and every new moon, says the Lord. Sabbath is going to be observed in the new heavens and the new earth, which makes it seem kind of strange, right? So let's play devil's advocate for a moment and think about how that would actually work. So God created a Sabbath at creation, seventh day, right? He blessed and sanctified the seventh day. He expected his people to be following it by the time we get to at least, at the very latest, Exodus 16, where he's telling them how to collect manna, making sure to not collect on the Sabbath. He gives a command from the mountain, writes it with his own finger on a table of stone, and says, remember to keep the Sabbath day, not because I just like that day better than the others, but because it's a reminder of what I've done in the past. It's a holy day. We find his people keeping it all the way till the mid-2nd century at the earliest is where we see a change. Then suddenly he says, no, don't worry about it. You can do whatever you want. Go on Sunday, go on Thursday, doesn't matter to me. And then he makes a new heavens and new earth and said, no, I changed my mind again. I think we're going to go back to Sabbath. Does that make any sense to you? It's kind of crazy, isn't it? Sabbath continues to exist from creation of this world to the restoration of this world in the future. And it makes you think about how deceptive the devil's arguments really are. Way back in Genesis again, Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, it says, this is the devil talking, he says, did God really say you must not eat the fruit from the tree in the garden? Can you already see at the very beginning, the devil is starting to twist the words of God? Is that really what God meant when he said don't eat it? Maybe he meant something a little bit different. You will not die. Have you noticed that? God didn't really mean what he said he meant. You will not die. God knows that if you eat the fruit from that tree, you will learn about good and evil and will be like God. I'll tell you what. The devil gets an A for persistence. The devil gets an F for originality. Still using the same arguments today. Keep in mind, we see another place of this exact same behavior in the Bible. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is being tempted in the wilderness, right? And what does the devil say to him? If you are the Son of God, jump down, because it is written, he has put his angels in charge of you. They will catch you in their hands, so you will not hit your foot on a rock. Same arguments. God didn't really mean what he said. This is really what God was saying. Still happening today. What was Jesus' response? He responded to him 4 times. First in verse 4, it is written in scriptures, a person lives not only on bread, but everything that God says. Verse 7, it also says in the scriptures, do not test the Lord your God. And finally, in verse 10, it is written in the scriptures, you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him. How did Jesus respond? It is written. He referred back to scripture. And in Jesus' day, that was only the Old Testament. He referred back to what God had said and reframed it as God intended it to be said. Even in his dealings in the Sabbath. People will say, Jesus broke the Sabbath. Nope. If you actually look closely, Jesus said what was lawful to do. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. He didn't say, Sabbath is over. What are you guys talking about? Don't worry about that. He said, nope. You're talking about things that aren't part of the law. Here is what the law says. Very different. And you see, the devil keeps using the same tricks. Twisting the scriptures. Using it in such a way to try and deceive God's people. I'll tell you what. If Google Gemini can understand the Sabbath, surely we as Christians can have a better understanding. Surely we as Christians can grow closer to God through remembering that holy day every week, looking back to the things God has done and looking forward to the things that God is still doing. One more verse. We find this in James chapter 1, verse 25. Truly happy people are those who carefully study God's perfect law that makes people free. And they continue to study it. They do not forget what they heard, but they obey what God's teaching says. Those who do this will be made happy. God's law was designed to make you happy. Let me say that again. God's law was designed to make you happy. We don't usually look at laws that way, do we? We usually look at them as they are inhibiting our happiness in some way. Why do I have to go 35 miles per hour? I want to go 55. You're inhibiting my happiness of driving fast. And yet, if everybody drove 20 miles in excess of the speed limit, 20 miles per hour in excess of the speed limit, it would be a lot more dangerous to drive. I guess around here maybe everybody does. I don't know, but it's true. What I learned about Rhode Island is the speed limit is more of a recommendation than a strict law, many times. But the law is designed to help keep you safe, right? Because your happiness is going to be greatly diminished when you get injured in a vehicle crash, correct? The law is designed to protect you. Now, it's not always going to work in our civil laws in our society because those laws are given by imperfect people. If you don't know how imperfect the people making laws are, you could watch C-SPAN sometime. Don't recommend it, but you could. God's laws are perfect. Correct? Why are they perfect? Because they were given by a perfect creator. And they are designed to make you happy. Could you imagine how much better this world would be if everybody refrained from stealing? Why do you have locks on your doors? Can you imagine how much better this world would be if everybody refrained from killing? Can you imagine how much better this world would be if everybody honored the Lord their God and served only Him? The law was designed to help you be happy. And the truth is, the Sabbath is exactly the same. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man. It is a blessing for you. So why would you ever want to give that up? Let's remember that despite what the devil may say, despite the tricks and the arguments that come, God's law is designed for our benefit. And if we adhere to it, we are going to be better off for it.